Hello everyone. Welcome to the first ever edition of, I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna call it, but a drunk Spark Notes. And I am your lovely host. Basically concept, I'm a huge fan of, I've mentioned in another video, taking pretension out of books, classics specifically. And I'm also a huge fan of Thug Notes on YouTube. So I thought it would be super fun to do a drunk Spark Notes of classics, kind of make it a series. One, because I figured it'd be fun, and two, it gives me a professional excuse to drink. So I have a little bit of wine. This is almost the end of second huge glass, but we're just gonna top it off with, it is a Trader Joe's Rosé that was $5. Because look, I just graduated college and, you know, it's cheap and it's also super good. So we're just gonna top this the fuck off. Okay, cool. So, and this is also my glass of reason because everybody decided I needed to be a part of wine mom culture at Christmas and bought me all of these kind of wine glasses. Anyway, so the first ever book we are giving Spark Notes on in this lovely series is Dracula by Bram Stoker, because it is my favorite book in the entire world. I love Dracula. I could read it probably every day of my life. It's my favorite for so many reasons. Just because I fondly refer to Dracula as I Am Sexually Frustrated, a novel by Bram Stoker, because my boy Bram, let me give you some context about my boy Bram. Bram is a good man. He ended up marrying a socialite named Florence Lemon Balcombe, who she used to be like somebody that Oscar Wilde was courting, so that's wild. So my favorite, my boy Oscar and my boy Bram are super entwined. Love it. Love both of them. My problematic faves. But basically, but Bram and Florence get married. And, like, Florence gets pregnant at some point in the marriage. I don't fucking remember how long they've been married for. But she decides, because she's a socialite and a vain-ass bitch, that she decides and she tells Bram, she's basically like, look, pregnancy makes me hella ugly. I don't want to deal with this shit anymore, Bram. I just want to run my salon thing in the front, and Oscar's gonna visit, and I know you don't like that shit because he used to court me, but whatever. This is what I want to do. I don't want to be pregnant anymore. And Bram's like, Florence, I love you so much. I'm not going to ask you to have sex with me because I love you. I'm not going to force you into that. So if you don't want kids, because, you know, contraceptives really aren't a big thing back then. But he was just like, you know, he was like, I'm not going to force you to have sex because I love you. But of course, Bram's a man, so he needs sex. So where does Bram go? Prostitutes. Obvi. And one girl that worked as an actress in the theater that he was in control of, but not the point. Mostly prostitutes. Basically, Bram was like, well, shit, I am a man and I have needs, so I need sex, so I'm gonna fuck prostitutes. The problem is, Bram felt this, like, super overwhelming sense of guilt because he was like, shit, I'm cheating on Florence, even though Florence is fine with it because she's not getting knocked up. So Florence couldn't give a rat's ass about, like, Bram fucking prostitutes because it's not like she's having sex with them, so it's not like there's a chance for STDs. But he feels really bad because he's like, I'm cheating on my beautiful wife who I love very much, and this is wrong. And thus, that's part of the plot of Dracula that's been born. Bram hates this idea of the new woman. And it's not that he hates, he doesn't hate the idea of a new woman. The new woman is this, like, very much coming out of the Victorian era idea where a woman's fairly self-sufficient. She has a job. She's fairly sexually liberated. You know, she wants to vote, all that good shit of a modern woman, ultimately. Bram likes the idea of a new woman in the context of it helping men and serving men, but he does not like an autonomous new woman, which we'll get into why this is important, like, when I'm talking about the book. But basically, Bram kind of he doesn't hate women, but he has a deep resentment towards sexual women, basically. Bram does not like sexual women because he's, you know, cheating on his wife with women that sell sex. Which is interesting because if you ever read the sequel to Dracula, Dracula Untold, it's not Untold, that's the movie. Dracula the Undead by Dacre Stoker, who's like related to Bram. He's like a great nephew or some shit like that. Not a good book. I don't recommend it. To be perfectly honest, I'm not gonna lie. I regret spending the $30 when it first came out, back when I was like in 9th grade, 10th grade. But anyway, not the point. Jonathan has encounters with prostitutes when he's married to Mina, and kind of like has weird guilt about it too. So I think that's super interesting that Dacre, his own like skeletons of his family, he incorporates it. Anyway, we're not talking about Dracula the Undead because it's not good. We don't need to talk about it, but we are talking about Dracula. So the important thing to acknowledge about Dracula is why it feels modern throughout years and years and years. Dracula is written, I guess it's appropriate, I have slightly red wine. I mean, it's rosé, but anyway, it's super important to acknowledge the fact that Dracula is written in a sense of collected letters, journals, newspaper clippings, I guess translations of stenograph, players, all that good shit. It's super important to acknowledge that this is in that format, which is fairly popular, and it was popular when I was a kid, where it was like, you feel like you're reading something very personal because it's journals and letters and all the stuff. It gives a sense of realism to it, and that's kind of a fairly popular format in modern literature, so especially YA literature, oddly enough. So that's why it's kind of super duper interesting. That's why Dracula holds up so well and is able to be interpreted so well, is because of this. But basically, so Dracula starts out, if you've ever seen the movie that has Gary Oldman that's super weird and sexual, if you've ever seen that, it starts out, my boy Jonathan Harker, who's not really my boy, I don't really like him. My boy Jonathan Harker, though. I'll call him that for the sake of my friend Perry, because she loves him. My boy Jonathan Harker. He's going to Transylvania. He is a solicitor, which is basically a lawyer. He's going, and as a young man in training, basically, he's going to go help the Count, because the Count wants to move to England. And immediately, it's hella sketch. He's writing in his diary. It's super weird. Everybody's like, being like, don't fucking go. Don't fucking go to Transylvania. Don't go to the castle. And it's like, because they speak vaguely German, so like, there's the one lady where he's at like a tavern, or where he can stay there, or whatever. And she's like, this woman's like begging him to go. And she's like, Herr, like Englishman or whatever, please don't go, please don't go. And this woman ends up giving him basically a crucifix to wear around his neck, and like, Jonathan takes it and is very much like, I'm not Catholic, but I'm gonna take it because it's clear this woman's freaking the fuck out. Let me take it. And he like wears it or whatever. He goes, I feel kind of weird, like as like as a Church of England goer, because of, that whole split. That's a whole other story. But he's like, fine, I'll take it. And things just are getting weirder and weirder and weirder in his story. He also talks about like various food he wants to tell Mina to learn how to cook, which is really funny and weird, because it's his diary, so he's just kind of like keeping notes. So things get a little weird, where it's just kind of like he like sidetracks, much as I'm doing now. But basically he goes and he's dealing with it or whatever. He gets in a coach where it's this coachman who's like, I'm gonna take you to the castle. It's super weird. There's wolves everywhere. It's just sketchy. He swears to God. They're like driving around in circles. He's like, what the fuck? Whatever. They get to the castle. He's like immediately sketched out because he's like, there's no servants at this castle. What the fuck? It's super empty. It looks like nobody fucking lives here except the Count. And the Count is sketchy AF, because ultimately he opens the door and the Count's like the only one there. There's no, like I said, no servants. The Count's like serving him food and stuff, and he's like, this is suspicious. Like, very much Jonathan's like, this is suspicious, but I'm gonna let it slide. Like, because I don't know if he just doesn't want to assume the Count is like impoverished, but clearly he's not if he's trying to buy property in England. Jonathan's just like not asking questions because he's a fucking dumbass. That's why I don't like Jonathan Harker, because he's a fucking dumbass and doesn't ask questions at all. But so he's like, this is fine. And, he's in the beginning, he's having a great time, like, getting to know stuff from the Count. The Count's asking him questions. He's having a great time. Nothing, like, he's getting suspicious, and he's like, things are a little weird. but he's really not super concerned. He only starts getting concerned, like, as he's spending more nights there. He's, like, going, what the fuck? And then it's, like, sometimes it's, like, the daytime, and he's like, I don't fucking see the count. The fuck? And finally, he, like, at one point, he happens to, like, look out his window one night, and he swears to God, he's like, fuck, I see the count, like, crawling out the window, head down like a lizard. That's literally how it's described, like a lizard. He's crawling somewhere, and Jonathan's like, what the fuck? Like, this is fucked up. Something's wrong. Like, you know, his brain's been telling him something's fucking wrong anyway, but he's like, this is wrong. So, he's like, what the fuck? Also, the count, like, freaks out because he cuts his face open when he's shaving. He freaks out because he has a mirror. He freaks out because he has a crucifix. He's just super weird. And at one point, he has Jonathan write, like, 3 letters. So, where he's like, I will send them out and, like, act like you're, like, coming home. But, like, he's not leaving yet. So, it's really... Jonathan's just like, this is a sketchy-ass situation. And at one point, he fucking falls asleep in, like, the library or some shit. And the count's like, don't fall asleep anywhere but your bedroom. And Jonathan breaks that fucking rule. He's like, I'm gonna fall asleep. Obviously, he doesn't make the choice, but he just falls asleep, like, in the library. He partially, like, wakes up, right? Because he hears shit. And he sees, like, these vampire women. Well, he doesn't know they're vampire women, but they're these very sexy women. Like, they're very, you know, like, words that are usually, like, voluptuous, like... They're slinky. They're just, you know, very much the stereotypical, like, how they do in Hollywood, where it's like they're these sexed up women, you know. And he's just kind of laying there, and he's, like, trying to pretend to be asleep. And they're, like, talking about him, and they're basically like, we're gonna suck his blood or whatever. But it's very much a euphemism for, like, oral and, like, all this shit. It's a little, like, the older you get when you read Dracula, the more you realize how sexual it is. Like, I read Dracula the first time when I was 14 years old. You don't see any of that shit, and then you just, you know, every year... You go, oh shit, look at all the sex hidden, because Victorian era, we don't talk about sex, we don't talk about babies. Again, a whole other issue. Basically, before he gets his blood drink or whatever, the count, like, pulls the woman off, and they're like, he's like, he's mine, don't fucking touch him. So then that part, like, ends up ending where Jonathan's like, I have to get out, because he ends up going to, like, where the count is. Where he saw him, like, crawling like a creepy lizard down the wall. And it's, like, coffins and shit. And he's like, I gotta fucking get out of here. And it just kind of ends off, like, his part of the story ends off on a cliffhanger. And you're like, the fuck happened? But immediately you're brought into, like, Mina and Lucy, like, talking. It's, like, in letters. And, like, Mina is Jonathan Harker's fiance. And she is the ideal new woman for Stoker. Like, she has a job. She knows how to be, like, a good secretary. She can do shorthand. She can do all this shit. You know, she's fairly self-sufficient, but she's in no way, like, in control of her sexuality at all. So she's the ideal new woman. Like, all of her skills will later help the men, like, as we get further in the story. But, you know, her best friend is this like, Mina is also not well-to-do. I don't know what she is. I don't think she's middle class. She might be middle class. She's not poor, but she's not rich, and she's not, like, of a well-to-do family, but she's well-to-do enough that she knows Lucy Westernia, who's super well-to-do, beautiful, like, clearly, like, beautiful virginal figure, but she is, like, the things, and she'll get punished later, for, like, the sexual woman. Mina has, like, all these suitors. She has Quincy Morris. She has, Dr. Seward. She has Arthur, who's, like, a super wealthy dude. Is there anyone else? No, but she has all these suitors, and she just, you know, she's, like, very much like with Lucy, like, I can't decide, like, they're writing letters. Finally, Lucy's like, Mina, come stay with me, because you don't know when the fuck Jonathan's coming back, so stay the fuck with me. So Mina's like, cool. And so she, like I said, she has all these suitors. She ultimately picks Arthur, because he has the most money. Like, Quincy, like, is, like, a wealthy Texan, like, he's new money, but Arthur's, like, old money. And Dr. Seward is, like, probably poor as shit, I don't know. But he works in the asylum, which is important. But she has all these fucking suitors. You know, super very much like, I like all of them, blah, blah, and Mina's like, okay, whatever. Like, Mina's, like, engaged, and she's just, like, she does not give a fuck about, like, sex, like, at all. And Lucy's very much, without talking about sex, you can tell Lucy gives a shit about sex. Which is fine. But so, you know, so basically, finally, like, Mina's, like, staying with her. And she's noticing, like, Lucy sleepwalks, which I think is not out of character for Lucy. I think it was talked about at one point when she was a child, she was sleepwalking. But Mina's kind of like, what the fuck? And at one point, because she, like, wakes up and, like, Lucy's not at all, like, in the place. And Mina ends up finding her, like, like on a cliff, like past a graveyard. Super weird. She's like in her nightgown and a cloak, and Mina, like, you know, brings her back. And Mina sees, she knows like Lucy has 2 puncture wounds in her neck. Mina assumes she accidentally stuck like Lucy with the pin from her like cloak, like through like skin, basically thinking she pinched the skin. And she's just like, oh shit, I fucked up, whatever. Puts me, you know, Lucy to bed. Also, the windows are like open, like, you know, Mina's closing that shit, like, oh, that's super weird, whatever. And at the same time, we're getting, like, these interludes of, like, Dr. Seward's, he's, like, very much talking, I think it's called a stonograph, and I might be wrong about that. Like I said, anything that's wrong, I will correct in the comments, or in the description bar when I'm sober. Any big issues. But he's basically talking into, like, one of those big Victorian kind of record player type things. He's talking into it, he's recording his voice. He's talking about he has a patient named Renfield, right? Oh, shit, there is lightning. Spooky. Perfect. But basically, he's talking about this patient named Renfield, who just, they don't really just, I don't remember, I don't think they ever describe, like, how he got there. But they're like, Renfield's cray-cray. And he's very big on souls. So Renfield is, like, feeding flies to spiders. And feeding spiders to birds. He wants to feed birds to cats, and so on and so forth. And Seward's kind of like, you're fucking cray-cray. Why are you like this? And he's basically like, the master wants to, you know, change me. I want to keep my soul. That's a big thing. And Renfield's been promised by Dracula immortality, or basically be turned into a vampire. Renfield understands there's a chance that, like, when you become a vampire, you become a soulless asshole. Renfield doesn't want to lose his humanity and lose his soul, but he wants the immortality. So he's hoping if he consumes enough souls, that will counteract when he gets turned, and then, like, he'll still have a soul because he ate all these souls. It's very weird. Like, when you read Renfield, understand, you're like, clearly this is some, like, whoever, the guy that wrote the Hannibal Lecter series, like, for books, very much was inspired by Renfield. And in fact, there's actually a disease called, like, a mental disease called Renfield syndrome because of this. But Renfield's like cray-cray, and Seward's just like, what the fuck, whatever. But, you know, he's talking about, like, Renfield. He talked kind of about Lucy, whatever. Lucy gets her neck punctured or whatever. This all, like, ties in. And just all of a sudden, she gets really sick, and she looks very anemic and pale, and she just can't breathe right. And Mina's, like, noticing, like, the holes in her neck are getting bigger, and Mina's kind of like, what the fuck? And Dr. Seward's kind of like, what the fuck? So he's like, I'm gonna, like, telegraph or write a letter to whatever, to my mentor, Dr. Abraham Van Helsing. He was like, because he deals with kind of, like, weird shit. He was like, because he's like, this is nothing that I'm aware of. Because they're kind of like, doctor, like, do you know what this is? And he's like, the fuck if I know. I've never seen this shit. And, you know, of course, Arthur's, like, super worried because he's in love with Lucy. And he's very much like, my poor, poor fiance. I love her so very much. And she loves you and Quincy. So, like, you're important to me, too. Arthur's kind of weird and wishy-washy. They're all kind of weird and wishy-washy, but, like, all the men are, which is sad. But, you know, so, like, basically he's like, I'm gonna call, like, my mentor, Dr. Van Helsing, and see what he says. And Van Helsing goes, like, I'm coming to town because this is super weird. Obviously, Van Helsing goes, not like, this is vampires, because he's, like, trying to be chill about it. So, you know, he goes. He comes to, like, England, because he's from, like, Amsterdam. He comes to England, and he's basically, like, trying to be, like, he's not going to be, like, oh, this is vampires, because then he'll look crazy. So he's very much like, oh, well, we need to make sure the windows are closed. He's like, you know, she's really weak. We need a blood transfusion. So, like, he makes sure that Arthur's, like, the first person to get the blood transfusion. So that happens. He's like, oh, she needs to sleep with the flowers around her neck. Turns out they're, like, the flowers that are correlated with garlic. Like, he's taking every precaution to make sure, like, she's protected from vampires. And it doesn't fucking work. It just doesn't. Like, you know, Dracula, it turns out Dracula somehow got into England, because obviously we lose part of it because we lose part, you know. We don't right away see Jonathan's thing, and part of it is Mina ends up leaving, because Mina does get a letter being like, from, like, a nunnery being like, hey, we found your fiance, we found his diary, we're contacting you because he's acting crazy, come get him. Because we can't deal with this. So Mina, like, leaves, and I don't remember where the fuck Jonathan is. But, like, she goes and gets Jonathan. So at this point, like, Mina's not in the picture at all. Like, in the, like, super endeavor of vampirism until later. So basically, like, they're just trying to figure out what the fuck's wrong with Lucy. You know, Mina's trying to, like, get Jonathan back and, like, stable because he's being weird as shit. And she's trying to nurse him. blah, 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 blah. So Lucy's condition is, like, getting worse and worse. And at this point, like, everyone's given Lucy a transfusion. Like, even Van Helsing's given her a transfusion, Seward's given her a transfusion, Quincy's given her a transfusion. All of that, because, you know, Van Helsing, it's not even about blood type, which clearly is before science, because there's no mention about, like, you know, blood type. But I guess when you're a vampire, it doesn't fucking matter. But he's very much like, he's like, we need strong blood from men, basically. Like, men's blood is stronger. We need that. Like I said, Lucy's getting worse and worse and worse. It ends up Lucy dies. But Van Helsing's like, but is she dead? We don't know. I don't know why I'm talking like that, but very much so. And then we get a couple newspaper clippings. We get newspaper clippings thrown in. There's one thing about a boat and how the crew mysteriously died, which is Dracula killing the crew when he gets to England. And we're getting all these newspaper clippings about what children are calling the Bloofer lady, which is, like, beautiful because they can't talk right, which it turns out to be Lucy. But it's basically like they're being taken by a beautiful lady and they're coming back, or they're not coming back at all. And they're coming back with, like, 2 small pinpricks in their neck. Lucy's basically alive, or she's not alive, but she's a vampire, and she's taking the blood from children. And, like, Van Helsing's like, yeah, she's clearly a vampire. And he's like, LOL, so everything I was trying to do was to prevent vampirism, but plot twist, didn't fucking work. She's a vampire, so we gotta go kill the bitch. They're called women, as my friend Lauren says. But he's like, we gotta go kill her. So it's like, everybody's, like, in the cemetery, right? They go to the cemetery, and they're, like, stalking it out. Looking, here comes Lucy fucking walking into her tomb with, like, a fucking baby, and, like, everyone's shook, right? Like, everybody's like, except Van Helsing. Van Helsing's like, shut the fuck up, guys. Like, I got this. Stop worrying. Shut the fuck up. Like, Van Helsing is probably the most mature and proactive man in this, like, book, besides maybe Dracula. Basically, who's not the villain. Like, Van Helsing's the only smart one in this fucking group. But he's like, you know what? He's like, all right. He's like, we gotta kill her. And he's basically like, what we gotta do is we gotta put a wooden stake in her heart. We gotta fucking cut off her head. We gotta stuff her mouth with garlic so there's no way she can fucking come back. He was like, we gotta fucking annihilate this bitch, right? So, like, they get to the point, like, Lucy's, like, going back to her coffin or whatever. And, like, Van Helsing's like, all right, Arthur, you're gonna kill her. And this is important why we pick Arthur. Because he's basically like, for all intents and purposes, I made sure you gave the blood transfusion first. Because technically, since your liquids are entwined, aka the fucking, he's like, you're married to her. Like, ultimately, because, like, Arthur is, like, not aware that everybody else is, like, giving her transfusions. Because Van Helsing's like, you're basically married to her. Like, I made sure because you gave her a transfusion, you're married. Really, technically, all of them in that sense are married to Lucy, which is weird. So she's also a polygamist. But so, like, Van Helsing's like, you gotta kill her. And, you know, he's like, fine, I'll do it. And of course, well, he's not, like, chill about it. Like, he's like, okay, I'll do it. And he's like, it's really tragic and stuff. And here's the thing. This is where, like, once again, when you get older, you realize it's about sex. When Arthur kills her, one, it's immensely about violence towards women. Like, I discussed this in an English class. I also scandalized the English class because I brought up the sex part. But basically, he kills her, and it's very much reminiscent of an orgasm. When he's, like, he stakes her through the heart, so, he penetrates her, and she, like, writhes around and makes weird noises, and, like, she's foaming at the mouth, she's biting her lip. It's very much, like, it's supposed to be both violent, but very sexual. So it's almost like, even though, like, Arthur's killing her, he's, like, really sealing the deal, like, a marriage, blah, blah, blah. But, so that's super weird. Lucy's dead. So you'd think, alright, that's the end of it. Like, we're gonna be satisfied. Oh, hell no. Dracula's like, the fuck is this, you dickheads? You kill one of my brides. You're trying to foil my plans. Because obviously, like, Van Helsing's like, we gotta get to him, we gotta kill him. He's like, you're trying to foil my plans, so fuck you. I'm gonna, like, sort of turn Mina into a vampire. But she's gonna be at a halfway point, like, go suck a dick, basically. And at this point, Jonathan's back in the picture. He's practically useless. Like, I don't ever talk about Jonathan because he's fucking useless. But, like, Mina is supposed to be useful, and, like, Van Helsing loves her. Everyone loves her because she's, like, the new woman in the sense where it's like, oh, Mina has all these skills, but Mina's skills are viable to, like, a man, but she's not super sexual. Like, she and Jonathan get married, but there's no talk of, like, whether they've been fucking or not. Who knows? Not us. Because it's the Victorian era. But so she's very much, like, prim and proper in that sense. And, like, she's not sexually loose. So they're basically like, and there's an implication, like, I guess that Mina, it's semi-sexual, like, you know, the transformation that Dracula gives her. Because basically what he does is, he's like been biting her or whatever, to like sort of turn her. Basically he cuts his chest open and he forces her to drink from like his blood that's coming out. And like when Mina's giving her diary entry recount of it, she goes, "Oh God, it was in my mouth." And it was kind of like, it's vaguely like, is this about oral? You know, is this what this is about? Just understand, if you read Dracula, or if you don't, there is a sexual undertone. Please discuss it, like, in any paper you're writing. It makes you seem super educated if you talk about the fear of the new woman and the sexual woman. I swear, like, talk about it. It makes you seem super, like, astute. But basically, so Dracula's like, fuck you guys. Mina's, like, halfway between human and vampire. Like, she's a vessel. But the interesting thing is, because Mina's, like, tied to him, she can see where he is. So she's like, I'm a help, like, everyone, because I love them, and I feel like I've been a bad woman because I've been tainted, and I'm weak, blah, 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 blah. And once again, implying the sexual nature. She's like, I was weak. I was violated. Like, therefore, I am not clean. Because she has this whole thing where she's freaking out, going, I'm not clean. Like, and is, like, losing her goddamn mind about it. So then they're going to go on this wild-ass goose chase to, like, take Dracula the fuck down. So, you know, they're trying to follow him back, basically, to Transylvania. And the whole squad is there. So it's Van Helsing, it's Arthur, it's Quincy, it's Dr. Seward, it's Jonathan, it's Mina. Everyone's fucking there. And there's a moment where, like Van Helsing, like, takes, like, Mina, like, with him at one point. And she ends up, like, trying to be weird. And so Van Helsing, like, puts, like, the fucking, what is it? I'm a terrible ex-Catholic. Communion thing, like the wafer on her forehead, and it fucking burns like this like spot into her forehead because she's unclean, she's unholy. So that's like a super big thing. Basically, push comes to shove, they kill Dracula. However, Quincy dies first, my boy, and nobody ever puts Quincy in the adaptations except that weird ass like Gary Oldman movie, and Quincy deserves better. But Quincy dies in like the fight. Ultimately, they kill Dracula. Yay, blah, 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 blah. The last chapter is like a prologue, an epilogue, excuse me, of, basically it's like a year later, Mina and Jonathan have had a child. His name is Quincy, and everything's like la-ti-da, good to go. And that's the end. They destroy evil, blah, 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 blah. Everything's great. Like, I love Dracula, but Dracula is also sexist as shit. Like, acknowledging it. So, like, here's the thing. Ultimately, if you've stuck through this, you've gotten to the review part. Like, you've gotten through the synopsis. Your best bet, if you're talking about Dracula in a best way, I very much have written quite a few papers on the comparison of Mina and Lucy and, like, basically being the new woman and being, like, in the sense of, like, being educated and being self-sufficient, and the new woman in a sexual creature, and why Bram, like, punishes that, because I did a presentation on Bram Stoker, and he is so sexually frustrated. I don't remember the book I read, but it was, like, done by, like, a family member, so they were like, this is personal stuff, because Bram died of stage 3 syphilis. Like, it was eating his brain. He was crazy by the end. And again, that explains why he's very much hatred towards prostitutes. Prostitutes basically killed him because he got syphilis from them. He wouldn't have gotten a syphilis if he hadn't fucked prostitutes. But, yeah, also a friend of mine wrote a paper on the fear of male penetration. Basically, like, all of these dudes are bros, right? They're, like, bros, but it's very no homo. So it's kind of this fear of, like, no homo, basically. So, yeah, so that's Dracula in a nutshell. I could go on and on about Dracula really forever, and I'm trying to cut myself short because I don't need to make a 3-hour video on Dracula. But I could keep going, but that's ultimately the end. I could potentially rewatch the Dracula movie, talk about compare and contrast when I'm sober. But if you enjoyed this drunken rant, give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more, because the plan is to talk about more classic literature. Comment down below your feelings about Dracula, the whole psyche about it, whatever. If this for some reason helped you in any way. But yeah, so I would love it if you guys continued on my bullshit journey. And I hope you guys have a wonderful night and a wonderful day, whatever. I don't know what time it is, but enjoy yourselves. Bye-bye.